Welcome back, scholars. We are now going to start our lesson and our independent practice. In front of you, you should have your book and your T chart that shows Mark Anthony's decisions labeled strength and weakness. So, scholars, we are going to start reading on page 69. As I read aloud, I want you to consider, what does Mark Antony do once he gets to Antioch? What is Cleopatra's response? What are the results? And why does Mark Antony contact Cleo again? So we're thinking about this interaction between Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and we are discussing why. Again, this is going to be a strength, and we should create a claim and find evidence to support our strength. So, scholars, go ahead and grab your book. Again, we're starting on page 69. I am going to read aloud the first paragraph under Reunited, and then turn your book to page 70, and I will then read the first paragraph under Two Wives. Reunited. Once he reached Antioch, Mark Antony's first order of business was to send for Cleopatra. At this time, she'd readily complied. It had been more than 3 years since their last meeting, but time had not cooled their passion. It still burned as brightly as ever. Reunited at last, they spent the winter of 37 through 36 BCE in Antioch, recapturing the spirit of their time together in Alexandria. As before, Cleopatra provided the extravagance, luxury, and excitement that Mark Antony adored. Then we're going to move over to page 70, under Two Wives. Two Wives. Cleopatra was not only too glad to resume her romantic alliance with Mark Antony and to form a political alliance as well. However, she did not return to his side without plans of her own. Mark Antony needed to agree to certain conditions and meet certain demands if he expected to have her full cooperation. One of her requirements was marriage, the other was land. So, scholars, take a moment to consider what has happened in the text. And now we're going to take 1 minute to create a claim. Now, Mark Antony has made the decision to send for Cleopatra. He spent some time with Cleopatra. Cleopatra, in return, has made demands. Two of her demands is marriage and land. So we now need to consider, how did this decision for Mark Antony strengthen his leadership? I'm going to give you 1 minute. You are writing your claim. All right, scholars. So for my strength, I did write that Cleo and Mark Antony, they get back together. You can also use the word reunite. Cleo and Mark Antony get back together. They marry, which gives him an ally against Parthia. As I have stated my claim, I need to now go back in and find the best piece of evidence to support the claim that Mark Anthony and Cleo gets back together. They do marry, and it gives him an ally when fighting against Parthia. You're now going to take 1 minute, go in and write down your evidence. All right, scholars, so I am going to share the evidence that I found. So I wrote that Mark Anthony and Cleo they get back together, they marry, and it gives him an ally against Parthia. Now, my evidence comes from both pages 69 and 70. Mark Anthony goes to Antioch. He calls for Cleopatra. They spend the winter together. He needs Egypt as an ally, and he knows that Cleopatra's power and wealth will help him in defeating the Parthians. I'm going to leave that up in case you need to revise. Giving you a few more seconds if you need to revise your notes. All right. We're moving. So, scholars, we are now going to look for a weakness. We know that Mark Anthony marries Cleopatra. We also know, yep, he still has another wife, Octavia. So, as we read the next section, we are going to consider how did the people react to the news of Mark Anthony's and Cleo's wedding. Again, he calls for Cleo. Cleo makes her demands for marriage and land. Mark Anthony, in returns, marries Cleo, although he already has another wife. Scholars, I am on page 70. I will be reading page 70 and 71, starting with the third paragraph on page 70. Again, we're looking for the weakness. He makes the decision to marry Cleopatra, but what's the backlash? What happens after that? How did this marriage weaken his leadership? The news of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's wedding shocked the Romans. It did not take much to churn up old feelings of hatred and mistrust against Cleopatra. She had been despised as an underhanded and conniving witch since her days with Caesar. That her latest scheme involved yet another noble general did not sit well with his fellow citizens. Public sympathy sided with the patient and true Octavia, Mark Antony's wronged wife. Octavia declined to comment, but her brother let his voice be heard. Octavian called Mark Antony's behavior disgusting and outrageous. What's more, bigamy could now be added to Mark Antony's many shortcomings. So, scholars, again, take a moment to think how did people react to the news of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's marriage? Now that we've had some time to think, I want us now to write our claim. We are writing a claim that it weakened his leadership. You need to make a claim to explain why or how it weakened his leadership. Let's go ahead. We are writing our claim to explain why or how it weakened his leadership. A few more seconds. And five, four, three, two, and one. So, scholars, we talked about how the Romans felt about the news of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's wedding. I wrote how my claim on how this weakened his leadership is the marriage to Cleo causes a lot of frustration and hatred in Rome. This weakens Mark Antony's power there. There meaning it weakens his power in Rome. I now need to go in and find evidence to support my claim that I've made that it causes frustration and hatred, and it also weakens his power in Rome. I'm giving you 1 minute. Let's go in and find our evidence. Finish up my notes. All right. So, scholars, I want to show you the pieces of evidence that I use to help me write my claim. I wrote that people were shocked. It renewed their hatred of Cleopatra. He was called disgusting. And then lastly, I wrote that Octavian knew that the frustration towards Mark Antony increased his chances in being the ruler of Rome, especially since they knew that Rome could only have one ruler. Scholars, I'm going to give you an opportunity to revise your notes if revision is needed. Few more seconds. So, scholars, we have just completed our T chart to show a strength and a weakness based on Mark Antony's decision. In this part of the text, we see that Mark Antony goes back to Antioch and he calls for Cleopatra. Mark Antony and Cleopatra are reunited, and Cleopatra makes her demands. Her demands are marriage and land. Mark Antony knows the alliance between Mark Antony and Cleopatra is needed in order for him to defeat the Parthians. Their marriage shocks the Romans. As a result, Romans are now frustrated and angry at Mark Antony's decision to marry Cleopatra. Mark Antony is now called a bigamy. He is also called disgusting. This, however, increases Octavian's chances in becoming the ruler of Rome. Scholars, we are now going to focus on our annotation and discussion prompt for today. Our prompt asks, what decisions did Mark Antony make and did they strengthen his leadership? So you see there are two questions. In order for you to have a complete statement, you must answer both questions. So one, decide, did they strengthen Mark Antony's leadership? You are to select yes or no. Go ahead, make your decision. So now that you have either selected yes, it strengthened his leadership, or no, it did not strengthen his leadership, it is now time for you to write your claim. Before you write your claim, I would like to show you two examples of students that wrote their claims. On yesterday, we asked, what decisions did Mark Antony make? Did they strengthen his leadership? So my lovely son Miguel wrote, he settled in a life among the Athenians. So scholars, did he answer both questions? No. Unfortunately, although part of this answer is correct, it does not tell me if this decision strengthened or weakened Mark Antony's leadership. Now, an exemplar response comes from Iram. Iram writes, he decided to give for exchange 120 ships for 2,000 troops with Octavian, and this did strengthen his leadership. So, scholars, I wanted to show you two responses so that you can fully understand how do you get credit in your independent practice. Again, in order to receive credit in your independent practice, you must answer both parts of the questions and you must write in a complete sentence. Scholars, at this time, I would like for you to go to your T chart and write your claim based on the text today. What decisions did Mark Antony make? Did they strengthen his leadership? I'm going to give you 1 minute to write your claim. 25 seconds. Be sure in your claim you answer both questions. What decisions did he make and did it strengthen his leadership? 10 seconds. All right. So, scholars, you now have your claim written down and you're ready for your independent practice. Scholars, at this time, you're going to complete your independent practice. Remember to answer both parts of the question to receive full credit. You are answering what decisions did Mark Anthony make and did they strengthen his leadership? It's been a pleasure working with you guys today, and I will see you on tomorrow.